Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Thursday, the 3rd of October here in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, President Joe Biden seeks to deter Israel from attacking Iranian nuclear sites as the risk of a wider conflict grows.
OpenAI becomes the world's third most valuable startup with a funding round that values it at $157 billion.
Plus, an exclusive report on the US technology being used in Russian missiles attacking Ukrainian civilians.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
US President Joe Biden says Israel should not attack Iran's nuclear facilities in retaliation for its ballistic missile barrage this week. Biden's intervention marks a fresh attempt by the US to rein in Israel as G7 countries seek to calm hostilities that now threaten to spiral into a wider regional conflict. Asked if he would support the response which some Israeli politicians have called for, the president had this to say as he got ready to board Air Force One.
The answer is no. I think there's things we'll be discussing with the Israelis what they're going to do, but all seven of us agree that they have a right to respond.
Biden's comments come as the US administration continues to call for restraint by Israel in Gaza and Lebanon. Meanwhile, the possibility of direct conflict with Iran continues to impact the price of oil. Oil options show investors are betting prices will rise further as escalating hostilities raise the risk that energy infrastructure or crude tankers would be targeted.
OpenAI has raised $6.6 billion in its latest funding round, giving the artificial intelligence company a valuation of $157 billion. The deal is one of the largest ever private investments and makes OpenAI one of the third largest venture-backed startups, alongside Elon Musk's SpaceX and TikTok owner ByteDance. Bloomberg understands that the funding round was led by Thrive Capital, who put in $1.3 billion. OpenAI's largest backer, Microsoft, also put in $750 million.
Emmanuel Macron has endorsed a temporary tax on France's largest companies. It comes after the government announced a planned €60 billion in spending cuts and tax hikes next year in a bid to reduce the deficit and bolster investor confidence. Speaking during a panel with Bloomberg's Stephanie Flanders at the Berlin Global Dialogue, the French president acknowledged his country's economic challenges.
Having an exceptional taxation on corporate is something which is well understood by large companies, if this is for 1 year, given the level of effort which should be made. But it should be limited, and we don't have to forget, we have not to forget the reality of our economy, the reality of our competitiveness and our position.
Emmanuel Macron speaking there. According to anonymous government sources, a large fiscal adjustment is required to bring France's budget shortfall of 5% of economic output from around 6.1% this year. The French government is expecting to raise just under €20 billion with tax increases for wealthy individuals and large companies.
The first ever UK-EU bilateral summit is due to take place next year. Keir Starmer announced the news alongside the European Commission President during his first visit to Brussels since becoming Prime Minister. Ursula von der Leyen says that further collaboration between the two countries is on the cards.
Our alignment on global affairs provides a good foundation for our bilateral relations. And we have a set of solid agreements in place. We should explore the scope for more cooperation while we focus on the full and faithful implementation of the withdrawal agreement, the Windsor Framework and the TCA.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen speaking there. Formal negotiations regarding the UK's relationship with the EU are expected to begin in December or January. Starmer's administration is looking to forge deals on security and food checks, while red lines include not rejoining the single market and customs union. The EU, meanwhile, wants to prioritise a youth mobility agreement, energy cooperation and reassurances over citizens' rights.
New research from Bloomberg Economics says the Chancellor should adopt new 10-year fiscal rules to free up billions of pounds in headroom. our chief UK and European economists are calling for a radical fiscal overhaul in their paper, a plan which they say would release about £30 billion without jeopardising fiscal sustainability. The findings also argue the change would incentivise the UK government to invest for the future.
Keir Starmer has paid back more than £6,000 to cover the cost of gifts and hospitality he's received since becoming Prime Minister. The Labour leader and other members of his cabinet have faced weeks of criticism over the so-called freebies. When asked about the repayments during a press conference in Brussels yesterday, Starmer had this to say.
Until now, politicians have used their best individual judgment on a case-by-case basis. I think we need some principles. So I took the decision that until the principles are in place, it was right for me to make those repayments.
The money being returned is understood to cover the cost of 6 Taylor Swift concert tickets, tickets to horse races and his wife's clothing rental agreement with a high-end designer. However, the move is unlikely to draw a line under the row. A parliamentary watchdog is now investigating Labour lord and donor Wahid Ali, who has donated expensive suits and glasses to Starmer over an alleged failure to register his interests. Now, in a moment, we're going to bring you the latest on the Middle East. But first, I just wanted to highlight and underline the research that our colleagues, Jamie Rush, that is our chief European economist, and Dan Hansen, our chief UK economist, who are frequent contributors to radio, have been talking about and publishing. There's been a lot of debate about the UK's public debt and fiscal rules because the UK's investment is so seriously lagging behind rivals, and there's a lot of concern about missing economic growth or just simply trying to deliver more economic growth. And Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, has talked a lot about this. So Jamie Rush and Dan Hansen are now calling for and have fleshed out the ideas around this sort of proposal. So a radical overhaul to the fiscal rules, more radical than what the Treasury appears to be considering at the moment. I think that's the point to underline.
Look, this is a proposal to tackle one of the most difficult challenges. We know the budget's going to be very difficult, and part of that is because of these rules, which require that you have, debt falling by the end of 5 years. Now, they're often criticised, and we've had many contributors to this programme who have talked about how they need to be changed. So this is a plan outlined by our colleagues at Bloomberg Economics, looking at some of the changes that could be made. It's a very interesting proposal and should contribute to the debate as we look ahead to the budget on the 30th of October. Yeah,
absolutely. The piece is called Keeping Government Honest and Investing for the Future. If you want to read a little bit more about the pieces and the piece of work that Jamie Rush and Dan Hansen have done, you can read it on the Bloomberg terminal. Let's turn our attention, though, of course, to the Middle East now.
President Joe Biden saying that Israel should hold off from attacking Iran's nuclear facilities after the missile attack on Tuesday. This as Israeli forces have continued their ground incursion in Lebanon. Paul Wallace, who leads our team covering economics and government in the Middle East, joins us now for more. Paul, what exactly did Joe Biden say then, and will Israel listen to him?
Hi, Stephen. He was very unambiguous when he was asked whether the US would support an attack on Iranian nuclear facilities by Israel. He said no. That is quite significant because even if Israel wanted to push back against that, it would be an extremely difficult operation for them militarily to do without the US help for a number of reasons. The distance those sites are from Israel, and just the complexity of actually firing on them and causing them substantial damage, let alone destroying them. So without US help, a lot of people think Israel simply couldn't do it. It does have other options. A lot of people are talking about oil infrastructure, refineries, or maybe even oil export infrastructure. So there's a range of things it could do. But I think, it is significant that Biden gave a flat no to that answer, to that question.
Yeah, absolutely. Meanwhile, the Iranian view, the Iranian response, what have they said since the missile attack on Israel?
So once the barrage was over, this sort of barrage of 200 ballistic missiles, Iran said that's it for now. It was very aggressive in saying that if Israel dares to retaliate, in its own words, then it will do something even more forceful next time. It is difficult to tell whether this is pure bluster, and it's not surprising that Iran said that. But certainly I think if its territory was attacked in a very significant way by Israel, then Iran would do something. And this is the sort of escalation that world powers so fear at the moment, this sort of spiraling conflict that just gets worse and worse and potentially becomes a region-wide war.
What have we heard from Iran since the latest missile attack?
So Iran has been, sort of fairly quiet, I think, in the last 24 hours or so. But again, they're emphasizing that Israel should not react to what happened on Tuesday night with the missile barrage. They're trying to say that Israel should just let it be. In a sense, Iran wants it to be like in April, where there was a barrage from Iran at Israel, didn't cause much damage, and then Israel responded with a very limited strike on an Israeli military facility. But this time there's a lot of pressure on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu within Israel to do something much more aggressive.
And so briefly then, a word on what is happening in Lebanon then in terms of troops and movement.
So there, the conflict continues. Israeli airstrikes on Beirut continued. I think a handful of people were killed in the last 12 hours by an Israeli strike on central Beirut. In terms of the ground incursion, Israel suffered its first losses yesterday. 8 soldiers died in a battle with Hezbollah fighters. So that ground incursion is heating up.
Okay, Paul, thank you very much for joining us. That's Paul Wallace, who leads our team covering economics and government in the Middle East.
Now to some special reporting from Bloomberg this morning. Hundreds of billions of dollars of semiconductors from American and European companies have made it into the hands of Russia's defence industry, despite the US and almost 40 of its allies making it illegal to send them there. That is the subject of today's Bloomberg Big Take report, which looks at how one of the missiles was used in an attack on a Ukrainian city last year, which killed 7 people. Our senior reporter Stephanie Baker joins us now for more. Stephanie, this is quite a complex piece about the origins of the components that go into this weaponry. Some of it can be traced back to US and European companies. How is that happening?
After the full-scale invasion, the U.S. and its allies imposed export controls, trade restrictions on Russia to deny Russia's military access to Western technology, particularly semiconductors. Now, the nature of the semiconductor industry globally it's a very complex supply chain. A lot of the semiconductor producers are U.S. companies, but they produce those chips in Southeast Asia and China mostly. As a result, these companies aren't selling directly to Russia, but they're ending up there through a complex network of middlemen. And what I did was dig in through Russian customs records to look at who they were. And a lot of them were companies set up in Hong Kong that were mere shell companies. We went and hunted down their addresses and found there was very little there. One was a storage room, beauty parlor. So this has been a very difficult trade to shut down.
How widespread were you able to identify is this practice?
Russia has imported millions of these semiconductors, these chips that they need to produce their precision-guided missiles since the full-scale invasion began. And the export controls have proven difficult to enforce because they're not getting the kind of cooperation they need from China and Hong Kong. So the customs records are staggering to look at, that so much is getting through. Now, in December, Washington Washington warned that it would impose sanctions on foreign financial institutions that continue to do business with Russia's military-industrial complex. It widened that threat in June, and that has had some effect. The level of trade has gone down, and now it's difficult to tell because there's a lag in Russian customs records. But I think there is a tightening of the regime. We'll see if this makes it harder. It is already more difficult for Russia to import this stuff. They're having to, in some cases, pay more. Yeah. But it is very widespread.
Briefly, Stephanie, what have the companies said about this?
Right. So they say this is an illicit diversion of their products, and they don't condone this. They have taken steps to increase their compliance and check their distributors to make sure that these components are not ending up in the hands of the Russians. But it's a very difficult trade to stop, given the multi-layers of distributors that are involved in selling semiconductors globally.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.